Good afternoon. I'm going to be reading Genesis chapters 37 to 40, and we're going to hear about Joseph and his brothers today. And I hope you settle back, have a little bit of lunch, a cup of coffee, and this will only take about 20 minutes. Jacob settled in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is his family history. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was tending the flocks with his brothers. He was an assistant to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, and he brought his father bad reports about them. Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he had made him a long tunic. When his brothers saw that their father loved him best of all his sons, they hated Joseph so much more that they would not even greet him. Once Joseph had a dream which he told to his brothers. "Listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose to an upright position, and your sheaves formed a ring around my sheaf and bound down to it. Are you really going to make yourself king over us?" his brothers asked him, "or impose your rule on us?" So they hated him all the more because of his talk about his dreams. Then he had another dream, and this one, too, he told to his brothers. "I had another dream," he said. "This time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he also told it to his father reproved him. "What is the meaning of this dream of yours?" he asked. "Can it be that I and your mother and your brothers are to come and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were wrought up against him, but his father pondered the matter. One day, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock in Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers, you know, are tending our flocks in Shechem. Get ready, I will send you to them." "I am ready," Joseph said. "Go then," he replied. "See if all is well with your brothers and the flocks, and bring back word." So he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph reached Shechem, a man met him as he was wandering about in the fields. "What are you looking for?" the man asked him. "I am looking for my brothers," he answered. "Could you please tell me where they are tending the flocks?" The man told him, "They have moved on from here. In fact, I heard them say, 'Let us go on to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and caught up with them in Dothan. They noticed him from a distance, and before he came up to them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that master dreamer. Come on, let us kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns here. We could say that a wild beast devoured him. We shall then see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save his brother from their hands, saying, "We must not take his life. Instead of shedding blood," he continued, "just throw him into that cistern there in the desert, but don't kill him outright." His purpose was to rescue him from their hands and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came up to them, they stripped him of the long tunic he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the cistern, which was empty and dry. Then they sat down to their meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels laden with gum, balm, and resin to be taken down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What is to be gained by killing our brother and concealing his blood? Rather, let us sell him to these Ishmaelites instead of doing away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Some Midianite traders passed by, and they pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and took him to Egypt. When Reuben went back to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not in it, he tore his clothes, and returning to his brothers, he exclaimed, "The boy is gone, and I Where can I turn?" They took Joseph's tunic, and after slaughtering a goat, dipped the tunic in its blood. They then sent someone to bring the long tunic to their father with the message, "We found this. See whether it is your son's tunic or not." He recognized it and exclaimed, "My son's tunic! A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." Then Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned his son many days. Though his sons and daughters tried to console him, he refused all consolation, saying, "No, I will go down mourning to my son in the netherworld." Thus did his father lament him. The Midianites, meanwhile, sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and his chief steward. About that time, Judah parted from his brothers and pitched his tent near a certain Adullamite named Hirah. There he met the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua, married her, and had relations with her. She conceived and bore a son whom she named Again she conceived and bore a son whom she named Onan. Then she bore still another son whom she named Shelah. They were in Shezib when he was born. Judah got a wife named Tamar for his firstborn But Judah's firstborn, greatly offended the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, "Unite with your brother's widow in fulfillment of your duty as brother-in-law, and thus preserve your brother's line." Onan, however, knew that the descendants would not be counted as his, so whenever he had relations with his brother's widow, he wasted his seed on the ground to avoid contributing offspring for his brother. What he did greatly offended the Lord, and the Lord took his life too. Thereupon Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's home until my son Shelah grows up," for he feared that Shelah also might die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Years passed, and Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. After Judah completed the period of mourning, he went up to Timnah for the shearing of his sheep, in company with his friend Hirah the Adullamite. When Tamar was told that her father-in-law was on his way up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she shook off her widow's garb, veiled her face by covering herself with a shawl, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the way to Timnah. For she was aware that, although Shelah was now grown up, she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he mistook her for a harlot, since she had covered her face. So he went over to her at the roadside, and not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he said, "Come, let me have intercourse with you." She replied, "What will you pay me for letting you have intercourse with me?" He answered, "I will send you a kid from the flock." "Very well," she said, "provided you leave a pledge until you send it." Judah asked, "What pledge am I to give you?" She answered, "Your seal and cord, and the staff you carry." So he gave them to her and had intercourse with her, and she conceived by him. When she went away, she took off her shawl and put on her widow's garb again. Judah sent the kid by his friend, the Adullamite, to cover the pledge from the woman, but he could not find her. So he asked the men of the place, "Where is the temple prostitute, the one by the roadside in Enaim?" But they answered, "There has never been a temple prostitute here." He went back to Judah and told him, "I could not find her, and besides, the men of the place said there was no temple prostitute there." "Let her keep the things," Judah replied, "otherwise we shall become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her the kid, even though you were unable to find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told that his daughter-in-law, Tamar, had played the harlot and was then with child from her harlotry. "Bring her out," cried Judah. "She shall be burned." But as they were bringing her out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "It is by the man to whom these things belong that I am with child. Please verify," she added, "whose seal and cord and whose staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more than in the right than I am, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." But he had no further relations with her. When the time of her delivery came, she was found to have twins in her womb. While she was giving birth, one infant put out his hand, and the midwife, taking a crimson thread, tied it on his hand, to note that this one came out first. But as he withdrew his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." So he was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out, and he was called Zerah. When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, a certain Egyptian, Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and his chief steward, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. But since the Lord was with him, Joseph got on very well and was assigned to the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and brought him success in whatever he did, Potiphar took a liking to Joseph and made him his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his household and entrusted to him all his possessions. From the moment that he put him in charge of his household and all his possessions, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. In fact, the Lord's blessing was on everything he owned, both inside the house and out. Having left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, he gave no thought, with Joseph there, to anything but the food he ate. Now, Joseph was strikingly handsome in countenance and body. After a time, his master's wife began to look fondly at him and said, "Lie with me." But he refused. "As long as I am here," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, but has entrusted to me all he owns. He wields no more authority in this house than I do, and he has withheld from me nothing but yourself, since you are his wife. How then could I commit to a great wrong and thus stand condemned before God?" Although she tried to entice him day after day, he would not agree to lie beside her or even stay near her. One such day, when Joseph came into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were then in the house, she laid hold of him by his cloak, saying, "Lie with me." But leaving the cloak in her hand, he got away from her and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand as he fled outside, she screamed for her household servants and told them, "Look, my husband has brought in a Hebrew slave to make sport of us. He came in here to lie with me, but I cried out as loud as I could. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran away outside." She kept the cloak with her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story. "The Hebrew slave whom you brought here broke in on me to make sport of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and fled outside." As soon as the master heard his wife's story about how his slave had treated her, he became enraged. He seized Joseph and threw him into the jail where the royal prisoners were confined. But even while he was in prison, the Lord remained with Joseph. He showed him kindness by making the chief jailer well disposed toward him. The chief jailer put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners in the jail, and everything that had to be done there was done under his management. The chief jailer did not concern himself with anything at all that was in Joseph's charge, since the Lord was with him and brought success to all he did. Sometime afterward, the royal cupbearer and baker gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two courtiers, and the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the chief steward, the same jail where Joseph was confined. The chief steward assigned Joseph to them, and he became their attendant. After they had been in custody for some time, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the jail, both had dreams on the same night, each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he noticed that they looked disturbed. So he asked Pharaoh's courtiers, who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" They answered him, "We have had dreams. but there is no one to interpret them for us." Joseph said to them, "Surely interpretations come from God. Please tell the dreams to me." Then the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. It had barely budded when its blossoms came out, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes, pressed them out into his cup, and put it in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph said to him, "This is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your post. You will be handing Pharaoh his cup, as you formerly used to do when you were his cupbearer. So if you will still remember, when all is well with you, that I was here with you, please do me the favor of mentioning me to Pharaoh to get me out of this place. The truth is that I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here I have not done anything for which I should have been put into a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given his favorable interpretation, he said to him, "I too had a dream. In it I had 3 wicker baskets on my head. In the top one were all kinds of bakery products for Pharaoh, but the birds were pecking at them out of the basket on my head." Joseph said to him in reply, "This is what it means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and have you impaled on a stake, and the birds will be pecking the flesh from your body." And in fact, on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, when he gave a banquet to all his staff with his courtiers around him, he lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office so that he again handed the cup to Pharaoh. But the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had told them in his interpretation. Yet the chief cupbearer gave no thought to Joseph. He had forgotten him. That's all for today. It's very soap opera-ish, I must say. The brothers in jealousy over Joseph, and Joseph having God's aid in being able to interpret dreams, being given the run of households and prisons, and things. We know things will turn out well for Joseph, but the rest of the story is really, really interesting. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. If the weather is nice, go out, take a walk, and don't forget to give thanks to God. Thank you for being here.